Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada. In episode 26, we speak with sports performance consultant Brandon Marcello. Okay, we have Brandon Marcello on, and I've known Brandon for quite a few years now, and I know Don, you know him as well, so this is kind of a neat little interview for both of us to kind of quiz Brandon. But, Brandon now is kind of considered an expert in things like sports science, sports performance out there, and we want to hit Brandon up on some questions about not just what athletes do, but what can, regular people do in terms of enhancing recovery, enhancing their performance. And I was lucky enough to meet Brandon, I think in around 2012, 2013. I went down. He was at Stanford, where all the smart people hang out.
Yep.
He was very gracious in offering a lot of information to me and introducing me to some other people. So I've kept in touch. And somebody that I can tap into for what's going on in your world in terms of being like a sports performance consultant. And we know a lot of the same people, so it's great to have them on, Don. And I know you guys are both perform better speakers as well.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon, I think you and I connected. It was pretty recently. It was the last couple of years. I mean, I think I've always seen you at the summits, but I think it was might have been an NSCA conference where I came over and started bothering you. I think it was the one in Vegas, right?
Yep, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Charlie and a bunch of guys, colleagues that I have always spoke so highly about you. But do you feel like that's kind of become a little bit of your shtick, where it is more about the sports science and the recovery end? I mean, can you kind of give a little bit of background on the direction your career's gone, probably over the last few decades, correct?
Yeah, I mean, doing this for 20 years. I started as just a strength coach. Right. I mean, that's kind of that's what they were then. It's what we all were then.
Right.
So it was kind of started as a strength coach and kind of morphed into things, started realizing that it's more than just strength and conditioning. So I had to learn about nutrition and had to learn about recovery, and then had to learn about statistics and had to learn about, and not to be an expert in them, but to acquire knowledge to where you could find somebody where you could understand that you needed somebody, and then you could also figure out that somebody was full of crap or not, right? So say, okay, I need somebody who's an expert in data science. I know just enough to say this person's full of crap or not, right? So it's kind of morphed into now, Derek called me this on little Sunday evening, Sunday nights with Derek. I was kind of turned to a hired gun. And I said, well, that makes sense, and you can appreciate this, Don. Your name ends in a vowel like mine. So sure. Right?
I love it.
So it works out. So I solve problems now. I solve human performance problems, and it can be in any realm. It could be anything from staffing problems to recovery strategies to what technology should we use or not use to, how do I write a program for strength training? It could be anything.
What do you feel like people come to you for the most? If there's one question that you've been asked, I've got my list, but what is it for you?
Well, I think it depends on who's doing the asking, but typically recently, in like the last, maybe when I say recently, last 5 years, if a sports team, professional team reaches out, they want to know, what does sports science mean, right? We kind of talked about that the other night. If it's a college or university reaching out, they want to know, how can we get sports medicine and strength and conditioning to work together better, right? So it's kind of like the same things over and over. Everybody's experiencing the same problems.
So they're recognizing that a lot of these, I want to say institutions in a way, because a school, an athletic team, they're all recognizing that they need this, because they're starting to see other teams and other institutions incorporate this in, and specific organizations now are saying, all right, we might be a little late to the 8 ball. They'll contact you and say, how do we kind of implement this in? So it really is kind of asking you to teach them how to walk, pretty much, right? I mean, these are the most important things in our industry, I feel like, right? I mean, I always say, I tell Derek, it's like, I think programming is somewhat easy. It's become easier because when I started my career, a training template looked like a Chinese menu. We were trying to mix in all this fluffiness and all this band work. And I'm having a conversation with Charlie the other day, and I brought up the word hypermobile, and he flipped out when I said that. This was not the other day. This is probably a couple of years ago, and I'm like, but the guy's just loose. He moves all over the place. Like, what? He's like, deadlift him. He's just like, but it's the simplicity of specific things now. It's like the majority of us aren't sleeping enough. Like, does it seem very easy to you? Like, these are very simple things that these specific institutions need to be incorporating, but you got to dive in pretty deep sometimes, correct?
Yes. I mean, but at the end of the day, usually they know what they need to do. It's kind of like fixing somebody's nutrition, right? People know what they need to be eating. They say they don't, but at the end of the day, they know, and they know they should be getting sleep, and they don't, right? So these schools, you answer the question for them, and they know it, and they nod. But at the end of the day, they don't want to, and this is the sad part, right? They don't want to devote the resources into paying people higher wages. And they want the safe answer. They don't want the right answer. So how can we do this without rocking the boat, too much, pissing off coaches, and, having to they don't want to deal with the hard stuff. Right.
So we really are still on the forefront of all this. Like, we haven't hit the point where naturally not everyone's doing this yet. I mean, recovery has been a huge word, I think, in our industry. I mean, obviously, it's been here forever, but in the last 3 to 5 years, you hear a lot more people talking about it now. It's becoming the word, it's like recovery program, recovery. What do you, how do you convince everyone? Like, how do we start making that change? Because it's not really working. Not that much.
I think Brandon has hit the nail on the head. He's like a human behavior expert. We can throw all this other stuff out. What he said was really telling there was everybody knows what they should be doing. They shouldn't be running football players till they keel over and die. We know that, right? So what's the problem, Brandon? How come this is not getting through to these people?
I think it's a matter of people are very comfortable in doing what they've always done, right? And if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got.
Right.
And I think people are inherent by nature, right? That the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And that, I don't want to be the one to do something completely different and fail. Right. I would rather just kind of do the same. Like I said, you do the safe thing, not the right thing. And, we'll make small, maybe move that way a little bit at a time, because everybody always gives, well, we're not quite ready for that yet. We understand, but we're not quite ready for that. It's like telling somebody, well, your kid has a behavioral problem. You need to just put your foot down and tell them that they need to go to bed like at 8. Well, we're not quite ready for that. We're going to start maybe 10. We'll start with that, right? And even though they know deep down that they, shouldn't, right? It's like, so it's very much just, it is a human behavioral issue, and people don't want to do the hard things.
Bouncing around a little bit. I'm almost shocked on the disconnect between a lot of these sporting organizations and the actual players, coaches, strength coaches in the off season. To me, I was blown away. I did a shoot with an athlete probably 8-9 years ago, and I can't mention his name, and I can't even tell you what this guy did, but I remember calling Charlie up, and I was like, this is unbelievable. This guy's training Muay Thai. He's doing Olympic lifting later on into the program. He's training 6 hours a day. Yeah. He's eating a protein bar. He's already complaining about some pain in his lower abdomen and some shoulder pain coming on. This is a world-class guy. But watching him train in the weight room, his training age looked like it was 2 months. It didn't even look like it was. This is an MVP in their sport. So I give enough hints. But I'm shocked that the organizations, the players union, I mean, this seems like such an obvious answer. And I'm not bashing listen, there's a lot of great coaches out there, please. And for those, if any of them are listening to this and are getting offended, it's not geared towards you, especially if you know what you're doing.
Come on, Don. There's a lot of crappy
only
ones.
Derek, only Derek. But the point of the matter is there's a lot of buffoons out there, and you've got these organizations that are, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and they don't want to pay a strength coach what I feel like they should be paid. When the Red Sox brought in Mike Boyle to help out, they had a pretty good track record with Mike underneath them, and he had a really good track record on, the amount of injuries that the players had. And you look at these organizations now, and you're seeing half of the lineup is out because of injury. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing, but they're paying a strength coach $150,000 a year. Like, go find the best in the world and pay them, a couple $1,000,000 a year. You're paying Alex Rodriguez $35 million. Like, this is the guy that should be looking after your team. You should be bringing someone in like yourself or a Charlie or someone like that to manage this process, but they're not doing it. It's like you almost get what you pay for.
Well, they give you, I'll give you a perfect example of that. I was working with the team. They brought me in to do an audit. So kind of tell us what we do well in the world of nutrition. So I was talking with an assistant GM, and he told me, we're really committed to, nutrition this year, that we have allocated an extra $30,000 to the minor league budget. Ooh. And I'm like, so you're not committed? Yeah. He goes, what do you mean we're not committed? I'm like, $30,000 is not a commitment. He said, well, and he gives you the same line that everybody does, which goes back to what you're saying. We're a small market team, right? Not every team is a small market team, but everybody likes that answer because it usually shuts people up. So I said, well, you're not a small market team. That much I know, and you know that. So it's just not a priority. He goes, well, budget's really tight. So I followed that up with, is that because the pitcher you signed for $135 million in the offseason took the nutrition budget with him? Right. And he goes, okay, fair. It's not a priority. So, it's exactly what you're saying. It's that, it's a shame that they do not see the worth. And that gets down to the next question too. And, I'm sure Derek has some thoughts on this, just as you do, Don. Why do front offices and administrations not see the benefit that these positions can bring? Is it because they just don't know about it? Do we do a bad job at conveying that?
I think that's the answer. I think that's the answer. I think you just answered. I think when you have the front office and they're not, and they're not coaches, they're not trainers, they're not nutritionists, they're not, sport performance experts. No. You mock what you don't understand. You almost like push it aside and you say, all right, well, that's just doesn't seem important. This is about hitting baseball. Well, you know as well as I do, Derek, you know as well as I do. Could you imagine turning around and on average getting every one of your athletes to increase their sleep by an hour a night? What that probably do to the organization? Or maybe turning around and taking a guy who eats McDonald's, 20 times a week and getting him on a 70 to 80% organic diet? Like, oh my God, now we're talking recovery modalities. Imagine making that mandatory for the athletes where they're taking cold plunges or infrared saunas or, cryotherapy, call what you want. I mean, throw all this shit in and like, it doesn't matter. But could you imagine like these teams establishing a point system with incentives for the athletes to where it almost becomes a little bit of a game with these athletes to where they're like accumulating, like who's going to win this month on recovery points? Like, oh my God, that would be unbelievable. Like no one's thinking this, yet a lot of us are thinking about this stuff in our gyms. Sure. And it's like, I'm shaking my head. I'm like, I don't get this. Major League Baseball. This is the NHL. You guys should be the best. You should have the best everything. And they don't.
Well, we've transitioned to, like I know Brandon knows this, in the NBA, everybody calls it a players league, right? So now you want to get the best players. Look what's happening with the NBA now is, where does LeBron want to go? Right? Because that's going to change the landscape right now of where he goes. It's a player-driven league. So now the CBAs, the collective bargaining agreements, and all these things are structured around what do the players want. And as soon as you do that, everything's out the window, right? Because now it's just personnel. It's just a rearranged personnel, and then that's going to determine the outcome. Who gives a damn about the strength coach? Because he doesn't work with the guys that much anyways. It's really distorted now.
Well, and everything becomes a bargaining chip, right? So even if the players want their sleep monitored, right, they're going to say no, because now that's something they can concede and during the next CBA, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to give them sleep, even though we really want it. We're going to make them think we don't. So we're going to give them that. So now it gives us something. What do we get for that, right? So everything becomes a bargaining chip and a chess piece, if you will.
I understand there has to be a players union. I completely get it. I know this is maybe going a little off topic, but when you get a job, when you go and it's even whether it's with Major League Baseball, whether it's with McDonald's, you've got a list of rules that you have to follow. You've got a system that you should be following. And it's amazing to me. I think professional athletes, you've got people on the pedestal, and there's not too many LeBrons out there, but LeBron's going to retire one day. And when he does, there's going to be another guy. And if God forbid LeBron's career ended tomorrow, someone's going to come in and take his place as the next guy. And I've been raised in the environment of you're always replaceable. And it's a terrible thing to say, but it bums me out to where I really wish these organizations would map out a landscape of you're coming in to work for us and we're really proud to pay you $50 million a year. But to do so, you need to follow these rules. Otherwise, you're going to get eliminated like at any other job. And I think that type of enforcement has to start at the top of the organization. The New York Yankees, for years, they wouldn't let guys come in with these big beards. When they were hiring all these athletes, they were saying, you have to shave, you got to be clean cut. We don't want that. So it is at specific levels being mapped out, but then at other levels, it's archaic what's going on.
The Patriots are kind of like that from what I understand.
Yes.
I know Brandon they have rules, and then you see players are upset because, oh, I hated being under that system and I'm glad to go somewhere else. But of course they're going to lose. They're not going to be on a winning team. What do you think, Brandon?
No, I think, it's certainly a human issue, right? So like certain people respond better to that and they don't. The problem is if we go all the way back to youth athletics, take a wide receiver, right? At the end of the day, their job is to prevent a ball from hitting the ground. That's it, right? That's their job, put simply. And when somebody can do that better than the other people, they tend to get passes on everything, right? The hometown cop pulls them over. Oh, sorry about that. Hey, good luck in the game this weekend. So they're not held to any type of accountability. Many times they are given passes because they can stop a ball from hitting the ground, right? Better than anybody. And I think that perpetuates it, which I think you see, the only people who can hold sometimes these athletes accountable are their moms and the referees, and that's it, right? So I think it's a societal issue on top of that, right?
I'm seeing it, besides sports, I'm seeing it in the workplace also. I mean, I just think it's the overall mentality. And I hate using the word millennials. I'm not sitting there insulting millennials, but I am seeing that the workplace has changed drastically. And I'm seeing that when I grew up in the workforce, yelling wasn't taken personally. It was taken as, all right, you're not doing your job, and pick it up and make it better. And nowadays, even when you're trying to address someone and tell them that, I'd like you to do it a little bit differently, you got to get really, if you're not saying it in a specific fashion, there could be a lawsuit. there could be, someone walking out on you, which so be it. You don't want them there anyway. But I'm noticing in society in general, it's actually getting worse. I mean, I'm so adamant about my children shaking someone's hands and doing these simple things that we were raised. As an Italian, I was raised to, have respect for your elders and do specific things. And I'm trying to really, you know what I'm talking about, but
I do.
I'm trying to really keep that connected close, but I'm not seeing that anymore, whether it's sports or just in work in general. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, like I said, I can think of countless dinners where you're pulled out from your chair and having a conversation with him. Come over here for a second.
Yeah.
But it's true. And I, you use the term millennials. I don't think the millennials are a product of their parenting. It's not, and this isn't all millennials, right? We're not capturing everybody with this, right? I think the thing about it is they want to provide value. And if they are not allowed to provide value or do not feel they can provide value quickly, they want to move on, right? And that's also a product of their parenting. Not this shouldn't turn into something parenting thing, right? But that's exactly what I think a lot of these issues stem from, is how their parents raised them. And I think you're going to see the pendulum swing the other way, just like everything else. So, I do see it. I have seen it. And it does some good and bad, right? I think when you have some of those individuals who stand up to the abrasive coaching, kind of what has been portrayed in the Maryland situation, so to speak, right? I think that's good. I think it's good for some of these individuals to stand up against that and not tolerate that type of coaching. Because is it necessary? That's the question. Just because it's always done doesn't mean you always, can do it. Now, it doesn't excuse that behavior. Same thing, because I certainly see it too, where like, if you coach somebody who has never been coached or is not receptive to coaching, and you give them some constructive criticism, now all of a sudden they're like, what do you mean? I've been told I've been perfect my whole life.
Right.
And this is not, you're not right. So either you're either incorrect or my parents are incorrect. And I'm going to say it's you as the coach. And that's a problem there too.
No, it makes perfect sense. Derek, do you have anything on that?
Well, I mean, I like this whole human behavior thing, and I was going to ask Brennan, like, our audience is really kind of general population, and when you're out, just hanging out with regular adults, like, are people asking you about, like, hey, how do I get better in terms of my health and my fitness? And all three of us probably get those questions a lot, but are your prescriptions any different for the average person? Like, where do you start if somebody says, I just haven't been, I'm in my 40s, I'm not feeling as good as I used to. Where do you start with somebody like that?
I mean, they're all the same, right? I mean, I get this on every airplane, right? So it's like everybody always asks what you do, and then it leads to how can that help me, right? So if I don't ever feel like talking, I just tell people I flock sheep. I'm a shepherd. And they leave you alone. It's amazing what that does. But it's the same thing, because I always say it's all human performance. It's not, how do a basketball player, a football player, a soldier, war fighter, a barista, a surgeon, doesn't matter who you are, there is a certain level of human performance which you must achieve. And if you can achieve optimal human performance, then the likelihood of you being a successful barista, housekeeper, lawyer, mother, father, NBA forward, Major League Baseball pitcher, whatever, is increased, right? The odds now are in your favor of being successful. But at the end of the day, it's human performance. And sleep is sleep. Nutrition is nutrition. There are certain things we all need that we don't do. And if, like Don alluded to at the very beginning, if we focus upon those things, life becomes a lot easier.
I almost, and I couldn't agree with you anymore. I mean, I almost crack up sometimes because I'll have people messaging me about, macros, and they're asking me all these technical questions. And I'm like, listen, man, macros. I'm not saying when I have to prep for something, yeah, I'm checking out my macros, but I consider myself at a specific level,
sure,
doing what I do. I tell them, I said, just, if you eliminate the 4 nights of drinking that you have, or on the weekends, how you're just completely not taking a cheat meal, you're taking a cheat 2 days, you'd be shocked on if you just measured your servings in reference to maybe your palm size, your fist size, your thumb size, however you like to measure it out. But if you actually did some food quality control here, like, a lot's going to happen. But everyone's always trying to go to this extreme New Year's resolution. I have to dive in. I have to go 110%. And it's just, I'm talking about the 0.001% of the planet can handle that. The majority of the people can't. And because of that, I think this is the reason why we live in a very out of shape society.
Yeah, like, what you were alluding to before about the pro athlete going off to the guy who has the great Instagram page and doing the beach workouts. I think it's the same thing happen in general pop. You see this crazy thing, that's going to solve all my problems. It's sensational. It's amazing. Everybody's raving about it. And I'm going to do that 2 times per week to solve my fitness and nutrition problems.
It's terrible. I mean, Brandon, I can joke around about it. I mean, obviously I'm very active on Instagram. It's part of my business, but I can't, some of these influencers out there, it's terrible. And it's tough for guys like yourself or Derek or, any other reputable coach out there who has built a career on trying to be educated and who can probably steer any person in a better direction than any trainer out there with 5 million followers. Unfortunately, visually, this is what people like to look at. They say, wow, that guy's got great abs, or she's got a great ass, and that must mean she knows what she's doing. And the reality is you see a lot of these people put in a worse direction. And I see it with this whole boutique industry now with boutique fitness. I mean, do you ever battle with that with some of your players, some of your athletes who will turn around and think, oh, not to knock them, but I do Barry's boot camp. And you're like, what? like what are you talking about?
I battle with them all the time with that. And it's amazing. It's like, these people look that way because, they put a lot of work in, right? But they also chose their parents well.
Right.
So it's like, why don't you just go to their parents then? If they're the ones that gave you the answer, go talk to them, right? And they're always not a picture of health either.
Right.
But it's true. I do deal with it. And, one of the athletes who I worked with for a number of years, she was an Olympian. And when she retired, she's like, hey, I'm going to this, I'm doing that. And I'm like, that's great. She goes, why do you not care now? I said, well, I don't care because we're not trying to prep you for a gold medal, right? You're just in normal life. So if this is what you want to do and enjoy it and are you socially, cognitive, emotionally, and physically, enjoying this? Fantastic, right? But if we want to make deliberate decisions on performance, peak you at a specific given period of time and have some specific outcomes, then we have to do things a little bit differently. So yeah, I do fight it a lot because it is sometimes how people look or their online persona that they do so well. And it's at the end of the day, that's exactly what we're fighting. And it's tough because you have to have an answer for everything.
Well, it's like that's that cocktail night question that you get asked when you're going out. And I honestly now, I mean, I don't want to come off sounding arrogant here, but when someone just comes up to me and starts telling me what they do, I just say, well, how's that working for you? I mean, honestly, it's literally my answer now. And sometimes they'll kind of get thrown off by that, but I just can't have the conversation. Now, if it's a client of mine who's spending money, or if it's someone who's very opening to listening, wants to have the conversation, I'll have it. But I got to be honest, man, the majority of the people out there they just want you to hear and validate whether what they're doing is right. They don't want to take your advice. They don't want to change. Very few people do. I mean, because why is it that this boutique industry keeps increasing? Why is it that people are relating success to just sweating and how hard they're getting the crap kicked out of them when research every day is going in the other direction? That even in bodybuilding, when I've worked with bodybuilders or physique competitors, a less is more approach. People just don't want to open their eyes to this anymore.
We call them ask holes. Right, they ask you what to do, but then they don't make any change whatsoever.
That's why I said, "How's that working for you?"
Right, that's a great answer.
So, Derek, what about you, man? With your runners, do you have to deal with that a lot? I mean, you're working purely for you. It's from point A to point B. What's your time? What are you running this in?
I'm writing an article right now. Is like, I think it's what did I entitle it? It's What about just being boring? Like I just said, be as boring as possible. So whenever I work with somebody, I just start at the most boring thing as possible, right? Very basic mechanical things. And then if they say, oh, this isn't for me, then I don't have to work with them. But right. I think we're getting away from that. We're getting away from, does training have to be exciting? No, if anything, it shouldn't be. I remember I have all these videos from Al Vermeil, and he's working at the Bulls Center with like Horace Grant, Scottie Pippen. There was no music playing. It was quiet. They had an Eastern Bloc weightlifting coach there, and everybody was on focus and on point with everything. And these guys had 6 world championships, but you don't see that anymore. Like, I wish we saw more of that. We don't see Instagram photos of people focusing on, or videos of focusing on technique, good feedback.
What about me? What about me? What are you talking about? No music on mine. I mean, I have the occasional shirtless pic here, but hey, I gotta fluff that in.
Yeah, everybody's like, oh, it's got to be crazy. And it's like, I always say, well, you didn't consider the ST3, which is the stupidity, the steroids, and the starvation, right? But, it's crazy what's going on out there, that we have to recalibrate people to say, like, put in good work, be consistent, don't eat that stupid stuff, sleep properly. But that's not exciting, right?
Brandon, that's an interesting topic that Derek just brought up. You mentioned the word steroids and performance enhancing substances, which over the last, several decades, and since we've been doing what we're doing, we really saw it kind of come into fruition in the sports world. And, whether you want to say it's dipping out yet or not, I don't believe that. But what have you seen with working with athletes who, or have you not, like, when you see and someone's on it, but it's not for certain, you really see that much of an increase in recovery? I mean, are there specific signs and indicators that you can pick up on where someone's doing it?
Absolutely. One, when they come up to you and ask you, hey, Brandon, what does half-life mean? That's usually a pretty good indicator that maybe they're starting to explore something. Or,
well, explain to people what half-life is, because I know a lot of people aren't going to really know what that means.
Well, meaning that, like, the half-life, if you take a substance, what is the length of time before half of it now is out of your body? Right. Then there's another half and a half of a half, and it keeps halving down, so you can determine when it's completely purged of your system, so to speak. Right. So, that, or, if people are overly retaining water, look a lot more vascular than they should, a little more irritable, or just flat out tell you, right? And it happens, right? And this is funny because I actually wrote an article recently about blood doping, and that our military should be doing it, because we're not in a level playing field. Sport is all about level playing fields and trying to see who's the best, all things equal. And I said, the military is very much not that, right? We do not want a level playing field. We don't give everybody the same guns and say, all right, go at it, guys. Let's see who wins, right? We want a specific, what's called overmatch. And so I wrote this article on why blood doping is okay. And I said, we should start to explore other performance enhancing drugs, as long as they're, kind of overseen the administration.
Monitored, right?
Because
post-surgical applications would be great, right?
There's all sorts of them, right? Because right now what you have these guys going out there buying their testosterone or whatever, right,
on the black market
in Afghanistan. And then that's not good. And they're self-administering it based upon what they've heard from a guy in Venice Beach, right? So it's like, that's when bad things happen. And I think there is an absolute application for these things if done properly and monitored effectively. So yes, there is a huge benefit. To go back to your original question, we do see enhanced recovery. But the funny thing is, going back to our initial talking point, we know that if we take 24-year-old men and they get less than 5 hours of sleep for a week, their testosterone drops by 15%. So to put that into context for those listening, that 24-year-old guy now has the testosterone of a 40-year-old man, right? Just because they got less than 5 hours of sleep a night for a week straight. So if we're talking about recovery and improving strength and bouncing back post-surgery and want rehab to stick or whatever it is we're chasing, sleep, right? It fixes most of those issues. So we don't have to rely on exogenous sources of things to make up for our crappy lifestyle.
What about with the military also? I mean, the last I checked, our military, when they're in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever it is, I mean, they're not getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, and they're not eating grass-fed food, and they're not in this low stress environment. I mean, these men and women are away from their families for months, if not years. Yep. Their nutrition probably isn't where it needs to be. Their air travel, because they're getting moved all over the place, is probably screwing up their testosterone levels. Don't you think this is something that the military could potentially give to our, the military could give to our people? Derek's laughing, but seriously.
Did you guys see that Hard Knocks video?
No.
With the coach talking about World War I? Oh, I got to post it. But
put it out. I want to see it.
There's a huge O-line coach. He's like massively obese, and he's older, and he's like, I don't know why you guys need to do all this stretching before you sprint. In World War I, nobody stretched before they ran across the battlefield, right? I'm like, we just did jumping jacks, push-ups, and sit-ups. That's what we did, So, yeah.
Oh dear, that's a problem, right?
But Brandon, to answer the question, I mean, I know zero about performance enhancing substances, but I bet you that if there was a doctor monitoring, a 40, 50, 60-year-old person who's really their health is starting to decline, and they figured out some type of cocktail to give this person to live a longer life, whether it's growth hormone, I mean, who knows? Like, do we know yet whether someone can outperform what they normally would be doing? If it was,
we do it all the time right now, right?
Yeah.
People have low T, and then doctors prescribe testosterone, and we prescribe all sorts of things that's performance enhancing. I mean, we give blood pressure medication to everybody in the world these days, right? But that's a performance enhancing substance if you're in biathlon, right? So it's like we give these things all the time. We just don't. We kind of look at it through this eye of it being unethical, because the fact that it's unethical in sport, and it's not ethical in sport, but in times of war or in times of preparation and readiness and for health and well-being, absolutely it's applicable, right? We have to the whole purpose of my article was to say we have to stop looking at things with the lens of sports ethics. We have to start putting it in the current context of the situation where we are.
It's funny, Derek, no one ever talks about this, but in the Mr. Olympia competition, which is obviously bodybuilding, they had at one point, I think they had the Olympia, or they had the Mr. Universe, and then they had like the Mr. Natural Universe. They actually categorize them differently. And I remember sitting here going, wait a second, they're actually, one category is just the name, and the next one is natural than the name. Like, they're flat out saying that these guys are on it. It's illegal, but they're categorizing them into two different categories. So I'm still arguing now, like, all right, is it an uneven playing field in MLB or football? Like, I would like to know the statistic of, well, actually, we it's not level. 70% of the, and I'm making the stat up, but 70% of the MLB are on some type of performance enhancing substance. And I bet you at one time, this was, what era I'm talking about, more the McGuire era. I bet that's probably pretty accurate. So what was level about that?
Well, there's a great podcast, and I don't want to send people to other podcasts, but I think it was a Freakonomics where they interviewed Lance Armstrong. I don't know if you guys listened to that one. And he was, I like listening to him, even though a lot of people think he's a dick, but he's very frank about stuff, right? And he said, look, the half-life thing that Brandon talked about, we didn't do anything sophisticated. We just minded what the half-life of for EPO, and we did blood doping at certain times. And basically it told me that just because somebody's drug tested a bazillion times does not mean that eradicates them from being a drug user, right? They just might be very good at avoiding drug detection. So you always see in these leagues that, well, we do drug testing. Well, we have police doing speed checks all over the place, but people are still speeding all the time. So I just think that to just absolutely believe that we've eradicated drug use because we have drug testing it's absolutely ridiculous. But
if they wanted to really monitor it, they could really monitor it. Like, give me a break. Like,
get cameras in everybody's.
But you have a mandatory piss test every Monday at team meeting.
But when that's happening, and if the drug half-life is 2 hours, you know what I mean? Like, it's that's what's happening right now. It's so easy for people to avoid that.
Is any performance enhancing drugs half-life less than a week? I mean, I'm not talking about
EPO is like a couple hours, right?
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. I remember hearing about even sprinters were using EPO because it's an anabolic, right? It just, obviously helps with your blood cell counts, and it's, so and then there's going to be something gene doping that comes around the corner next, right?
Yeah, but what if it was a random every week? What if every athlete had to go through one random every week, and out of nowhere it's like Thursday night before the game, they're like I mean, seriously, like, I mean, they could monitor this shit if they wanted to.
Well, they do it at home, and then when somebody rings the doorbell, they don't answer the door. You can't break in the house, right? So that's all Armstrong did. So there's always ways, and so it's very difficult. And
I think the question you have to ask is, why do we implement drug testing, right? It's like, why do we put life preservers on airplanes? To make people feel better, right? Why do we do drug testing? So that people think there's integrity within the sport and we don't lose viewership, which means we lose sponsorship and dollars. Right?
Yeah, MLB was probably better off not opening that can of worms, though. I mean, when you're talking about that debacle that happened in the steroid era with Bonds and McGuire and Sosa and Kurt Schilling and all these guys, Rafael Palmeiro, all up on the – I'm watching some of my favorite ball players and athletes of all time, Manny Ramirez, sit up – and these guys are sitting up on this panel. These guys are – and they're turning stones over. The Brett Boone, 10 years beforehand, they said did it. Like, who gives a shit? Like, focus on the future. Stop. That hurt the sport more than I think protected the integrity in the future. Because what we are seeing right now is go through the list of batting averages. I think right now there's something like under 20 guys in the major leagues are hitting over 300. I mean, I might give or take. I mean, is 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there was probably 100 guys hitting over 300. There was probably 100 guys who had over 30 home runs. And just to see this number decline, I think that in itself hurts baseball. I mean, listen, we're all adults. I haven't taken it. I'll never take it because I bet in my lifetime there's not going to be enough research. It's not going to be accepted. I've always been, they say, a natty, so I'm going to hold to my reins. But you know what, man? It's sickening when I see happening in these sports. And now it bothers me even more because I can tell the guys who are on it because so many guys aren't on it. And you can kind of point out and tell who's on it. And you're like, well, that guy's hitting this many home runs because he's on the gear. So I don't know. I think it's a mess.
I agree. It is a mess. It's unfortunate, right? Because at the end of the day, you want the sport which you love and enjoy to watch pure, right? That's kind of what you hope for. And that's kind of like the Olympic thing, right? It's like, okay, this is like amateurism at its, pinnacle of seeing these people just out there for the sake of competition. And you have the music playing and this and that. And then when it becomes tainted with the drug testing, and we know it happens, right? And then you look at things a little differently, and it makes people mad. It makes people angry. And I think that's kind of what the downside, right? That's where viewership gets hurt and sponsorship dollars get hurt and all sorts of things. So,
not to run off on this tangent right now, but you obviously hit a soft spot here. So, I mean, it's one of those things.
You hide it well.
Thank you. Well, it's, it's one of those things where, I think, to each his own. You're an adult, and if Lance Armstrong is on a level playing field, and the top 10 who finish in the Tour de France is all on it, and they probably are, it's like, but you're pointing the finger at him. What bothers me the most is the kid out there who's picking up the magazine, and he's pure, and he's opening that bodybuilding magazine of Ronnie Coleman's workout. That's the amount of volume in it would kill anybody. And now Ronnie can hardly walk. So people will open these publications and they'll read what the athlete's doing and they'll think, well, that's what I need to do. And they don't understand that that person's built completely different now because of what they're putting into their body.
Well, there's a cost of doing business.
Yes.
Right. And they've done the studies. I don't remember the number, but like, they interviewed X amount of Olympians and they said, if you were guaranteed a gold medal, but yet years will be taken off your life, would you take X? And like some overwhelming percentage said, absolutely.
I think it was over 50%.
There you go.
And I think the statistic, if you quote me on this, but I think it was if you had 5 more years to live to win an Olympic gold medal. I think that's exactly what it was. I was shocked. This is what these people have been bred to do their whole life. If you're at an Olympic level, if you're at a major league level, an NHL level, you have been doing that your entire life. And to take that away and to remove it with never having success, I mean, for a lot of these people, that's like dying. And I think that's why we're seeing so many ex-athletes go into incredible depressions and suicides and, drug addictions and become,
Let's change lanes here. Like, Brandon, you were in Silicon Valley, and, have you done corporate wellness consultations as well? Because you see what's happening with Elon Musk now. Yep. Oh, I'm working 120 hours a week or whatever, and the guy's going to shit, right? And there's Silicon Valley's dirty little secret was the mental health issue with all of the stress people are expected to be under in terms of lack of sleep and work they put in. What do you have to say about that?
I'll tell you, I had the fortunate, I had the benefit of knowing Condoleezza Rice. I got to know her very, very well during my time at Stanford. I actually used to train her every Tuesday and Thursday at 5:30 in the morning. And there was some things that she always did. She always worked out, whether it was on the road if she was traveling or at home with me. And the other thing she said, Brandon, I've always got a minimum of 8 hours of sleep every night. She goes, the only time I did not get less than 8 hours was during 9/11, which you can imagine, right? She goes, and I always had in the back of my head that I could not make decisions on behalf of the American people with less than 8 hours of sleep. I just didn't feel right about that. So you have somebody who's very successful at a very high level, and understands that sleep deprivation, lack of exercise, and poor nutrition is not a badge of honor, right?
Right.
It's actually not a good thing. And she understood that, and she lived in Silicon Valley. But you see, like you said, Derek, with Elon Musk and all these people, it's this more is better. And it's not. Again, it goes back, there's a cost of doing business. And at the end of the day, if we are not optimized physically, cognitively, socially, and emotionally, that's when bad things happen. And that's what, to Don's point about these people having an identity, right? That was their connection, right? People are people. They want food, shelter, and a sense of belonging. And if one of those things goes away, if they get pulled out, they can't compete in the Olympics or in the NHL or Major League Baseball, they've lost their identity, which is their sense of belonging. And now their food and shelter acquisition or sustainment is in jeopardy. So they're not emotionally optimized. They don't have emotional performance.
I'm going to read, if you don't mind right now, Derek, I'm putting on my little fake readers here because I don't have my readers on. You like these thin optics? I'm reading something right now off my phone, and this is from the Huffington Post. And this is because, and they're actually, you're going to know what they're promoting. Apple CEO Tim Cook wakes up at 3:45 every morning to go through email, exercise, and grab a coffee. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is already in the gym by 4 a.m. PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi rises at 4 a.m. Starbucks executive Howard Schultz gets up at 4:30. Jack Dorsey, co-founder and CEO of Twitter, 5 a.m. LinkedIn CEO Jeff Weiner, 5:30. Richard Branson, 5:45. Gary Vaynerchuk, 6. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer. They are glorifying this, though. Yeah. This has become. Listen, I'm up some mornings.
When are they going to sleep?
Yeah, but
they don't tell you when they go.
This is, and I can bet it's not that early either. So I got to wake up some mornings between 4 and 5. It's the worst thing for me to be doing. Yep. I clearly feel a huge difference if I can get up at 6:30 or at 4 to 5 a.m. I am in bed. I've got a rule. Every night I'm in bed by 9 p.m. I'm in bed because it's the best I can do. I can't. It's what my job allows me. When I go 9 to 4, fine. I'm still getting 7 hours. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. It's what I'm doing right now because it's my job's requiring it. I'm cutting it back. But I'm not out drinking alcohol. I'm not out partying. I'm not out smoking pot. I'm not out, I've got certain things have to give. We're validating this in the Huffington Post right now. People are starting to say, well, the most successful people are waking up early. So should I just sleep less to be successful? And I think it's disgusting.
Well, I agree. You know, what's funny is Tim Cook is at Starbucks every morning at 5:15 because we used to go to the same Starbucks every single morning. And I would see him there. We'd walk in at the same time. And the funny thing is I didn't even know who he was for years. But it's true. They do glorify that, but they glorify, and that's the thing, some of the people that are successful, right? That can't be all of them, right? We love to point to the outliers. We don't point to the ones that do that same type of schedule and then have some sort of disease or get sick or have burnout or, anxiety, panic attacks on the other end of the spectrum, right? We don't talk about the multi-million-dollar or billionaire that does sleep 9 hours every night. What's funny is Ariana Huffington is a huge advocate of getting a good night's rest.
Right.
And has that book called The Sleep Revolution, and is really anti this whole badge of courage thing. Yet, like, they do what they say because people are interested. It's sexy, right? It's what people wanted to know.
But it's amazing what we glorify in this world. So right there, we're glorifying lack of sleep. Fitness facilities are glorifying beating the living shit out of someone. And that's supposedly what they need. So we are missing the 8 ball here. I mean, we are clearly Rocky, my favorite movie of all time. Is it really sending the best message? Think about this. It's like the training montage, which has got me through more workouts in my life. But the reality is, how much do they really focus on him after every fight that he fought? Or showing what a boxer has to do after he preps for a world championship, I mean, they did in that one Rocky scene when him and Apollo were in bed for months, but, but the reality is, we glorify what isn't always the best thing. And people, unfortunately, they don't have to know any better. It's not what they do for a living, but they follow it.
Right. I mean, 8 raw eggs in the morning.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Come on, baby.
Right out of the.
Come on. Crack. Right? I love it. I can't tell you the last time I had a white egg too. It was like a white egg, and I'm watching them do that. I'm like, oh man, my eggs have been organic and brown almost my whole life.
They were white, yeah.
It's awesome. But so Brandon, listen, if you were, because we've taken a ton of your time so far, and we can't thank you enough to just get someone of your caliber on this podcast is really incredible for me. I know Derek's probably like, oh no big deal for me, but for me, it's pretty.
I look at us as like all the same. Like I just love chatting with you guys. Like we could do this anywhere, and it would be fun. It would be fun, right? It's not.
Give our listeners some takeaways though, and I'm not saying it has to be 3, 5, 2, but like what are a couple of takeaways you want people to leave here knowing about things to carry in their lifestyle that they need to focus on to become healthy and successful?
I think the big thing, I think number one takeaway, and I've been giving this presentation for the last 2 years now, is sleep. Yeah. You have to make it a priority. It has to be important. And there are a number of successful people out there that find the time to sleep. I get it. Sometimes you just can't get a good night's rest. Sometimes your kids are sick. Sometimes you have to work a late shift. I get it. But get the sleep when you can. It's important. I think that's the number one thing. And then, like, we talked about earlier, is find somebody who has a good expertise, right? And expertise does not mean, in the virtual world, right? Because virtual expertise means virtually none.
Right, exactly.
So, it's important to make sure that you seek out these experts and listen to them. And that's really, it's as simple as that. There isn't any more than just 2 takeaways, right? Listen to people and get your sleep.
I think that's great advice. And Brandon, can you let everyone know, because I'm really hoping everyone turns around and decides to look you up or Google you and learn more about what you do. But if someone needs to find more out about you, what's the best resource to look for?
I have a website, brandonmarcellophd.com. Social media is all bmarcello13 or bmarcello13, whatever you want to say. It all works for me.
It's a good Italian name. Names that end in vowels.
That's right.
Hanson, we can make yours what? Hansony? Hansano?
Hansano.
Hansano. From Ischia.
I just want to know which Starbucks to go hang out with to be with Brandon. What time and what because Brandon.
I'll tell you, it was funny because I joke about that. It was like I see the same people every morning, because when you go in at 5:15, there's like you see the same people every day, and I get to thinking to myself, I wonder what these people do, right? So I said, one of these days I'm going to ask them what they do, and right. So what happened is I was on Twitter and it says who to follow, right? It gave you the hour, like who you should follow, and I see the small little thumbnail, and I'm like, hey, that's the Starbucks dude. Yeah. I said that now I can know what he does, and I click on him and it says he had a blue check. And back then, this was like, 15 years ago, whatever, 10 years ago, people were like, whoa, blue check. So 10 years ago, it was like, Tim Cook, CEO, Apple. I was like, whoa. Wow. I guess I know what he does. And I actually told him the story like a week later. Nicest guy ever. Introduced himself. I said, I had to tell you, this is kind of funny. We have coffee together every day, every morning, but don't say a word to anybody in here.
I love it. I love it.
You got to pitch it. Starbucks name tags.
Right. They probably don't want that. Right.
Well, boys, thank you, gentlemen. Great session, man. Really appreciate it. Brandon, looking forward to catching up with you at one of the next summits, and just best of luck to you and your family. And Derek, I'll give you a call later, brother.
Yep. Sounds good, guys. Thanks, you very
guys.
much.
Take care.